Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this one, we're going to be doing the Ornamental Straight Sword. It's the straight swords that you get at the beginning of the game. The tutorial boss, the Grafted Scion, drops it. You can get it later in the game. I'll explain that in a little bit. These are actually really fun to use. So while technically you only get one, it ends up being two. It has an ability to turn into two weapons, which then changes the charged attack and gives you a two-handed attack with your R1. I'm on Xbox, for me to be R1, which is normally your regular light attack. Now has the dual stance typical L1 attack, which makes this a rather unique weapon given the fact that it has that ability to change and then utilize very quick attacks, which obviously can build up successive attacks. We're going to talk about that too, and it does a lot of damage because of that. Now, after activating the Ash of War, we get that special unique R2 attack, which has a combination basically of a bunch of attacks that build up successive attack damage, and it's really awesome. It leads up to a hard hit at the end of the animation, which actually does a lot of damage. The last hit on this Ash of War, basically what it turns into on the R2, is an incredibly powerful attack for a straight sword. And it's one of the most fun things to use this weapon and to be able to pull off that Ash of War that basically changes that R2 for those successive attacks. There is some downsides that I'm going to talk about. It's one of those weapons where you're going to want to at least meet that first poise threshold of 55 because it doesn't have a lot of hyper armor. And by the way, I didn't mention this yet, but you do get 100 extra holy damage on the weapon as well with the Ash of War, and it's a standard flat damage, very difficult to buff that part of it. It's more of just a little bit of a bonus. The better part of it is being able to use that unique R2 and then having the double attack with your R1s. It really does build up a lot of damage. Now for mobs, this can absolutely shred. It has actually really good AR and damage for a straight sword. The damage for a straight sword, as you're going to see here, especially when you build up the successive attack stuff, we're going to show the build in a little bit, but it's pretty fantastic for it as far as damage goes, because these have a lot of potential, even though they do have a little bit of holy damage, which is resisted. Most of it's physical damage, and they're actually very good for a straight sword. If you're wondering why I mentioned about the damage for straight swords in general took a backseat to curved swords in Elden Ring and to a lot of other weapons that just have higher damage and around the same amount of weight. So straight swords were something that they took a little bit of a backseat in Elden Ring. They weren't used as much, but some of them are really good. I like the Warhawk's Talons, which I just did a build on as well, and I really like the Ornamental Straight Sword because it does a lot of damage. These are just really fun to run around with, to be able to hit enemies with and bosses and whatnot as well, even though we took on mostly regular enemies and field bosses and such. The early and mid-game bosses you'll probably be able to absolutely shred with these because they have really good physical damage, but obviously once again there will be a drop-off probably for the late game given the fact that you're using straight swords, and unfortunately you're going to see here again, even with that first posture threshold, they do not have a lot of hyper armor on that R2. Has a lot of damage potential, as you can see, that can absolutely shred when you use it, but it doesn't have a lot of hyper armor. You can easily get knocked down, which is probably the only downside to these. If you're somebody that likes straight swords, though, this is going to be one of the ones that you definitely want to consider using. I didn't realize how good they were until I started using them on some field bosses, regular enemies and such, and they do have a lot of damage. That 100 extra holy damage does add up to, and then the fact that the Ash of War, which essentially changes the R2, gives you a whole bunch of consecutive and successive attack damage build up with the right talismans and setup as well. By the way, you're going to see the name of this character is Kratos. I'm going to leave that build in the description below. I didn't change my character name back yet, but yeah, that build was pretty awesome. I did a Kratos God of War type build, so that's in the description below too. You're going to see that later when we go through equipment and everything. That's why my name on this character is still Kratos. It's still from that build, which was a really fun build, by the way. That one was absolutely a blast to do. Now back to the Ornamental Straight Swords. If you want to get this and not have to fight the tutorial boss, I know he can be incredibly tough to fight on the first run. And if you don't want to wait till New Game Plus, you can go to the 4 belfries in Liurny of the Lakes. You can actually go visit the Grafted Scion there, defeat him, get this drop. Won't be too hard once you're around level 40 or 50, you'll probably easily beat him and get this drop along with the shield, and then you can use this for most of the game. Like I said, it doesn't really have a drop off until the late game bosses. Up until then, these are actually quite good. They have a lot of physical damage, and as I mentioned, the right setup and consecutive successive attack stuff, you can really build up a lot of damage with that R2. Showing the Deathrite Bird here because they're one of the only few enemies in the game that's weak to holy damage, but for this weapon, unfortunately, given the fact that it's just an extra 100 flat holy damage, it's not going to do too much to them. It's just like kind of regular damage. It's nothing too crazy. A lot of other holy weapons will probably be better to defeat them with. Even so, as you can tell, the AR and the physical damage is quite good, but keep in mind, it's only a flat extra 100 holy damage. We get to show off the damage here with the Bell-Bearing Hunter. You're going to see that charged R2 that has a whole bunch of hits that builds up consecutive and successive attack stuff. And then once again, that last hit in the combination does a lot of damage. That's something that you really want to build up to because you can absolutely shred, as you can see here. Obviously, he's unaware when he first appears. We're going to take advantage of that, and then we're able to do a lot of damage to him, shred his HP very quickly, and then build up with those light R1s to finish off the enemy. Not too tough. Now let's get into equipment. Now for equipment, we have the Ornamental Straight Sword +9, preferably +10, but I didn't have a Somber Ancient Dragon Smithing Stone. Any seal will do. We have the Crucible Knight set on, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Ritual Swords Talisman, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, then we have the Thorny tier, and you can use the Faith tier for buffs as well, or the Defense tier. Now, I want to mention that I tried both the Shard and the Axe Talisman, and the Shard didn't seem to do much once I switched back to the R2 and was mainly using that. The Axe Talisman may have boosted it, but it didn't seem like it was by 12%, so this was the setup I ended up going for, and I was able to get a lot of damage out of it. Now for stats, this is basically an all-dex weapon. It scales with a B in dexterity. It actually doesn't have any faith scaling at all, just has the flat 100 holy damage, so you want to get your dexterity stat as high as possible. The minimum strength requirement on the weapon is 10. Once you have that, you'll be able to get a lot of damage out of these. Now let's get into buffs. Now for buffs, you're going to drink your tear first because obviously that lasts 3 minutes, so that's longest. And then we're going to use Golden Vow. You can throw in Blessing's Boon for some extra HP. And then I like using Flame Grant Me Strength because I want to boost the physical portion of the weapon. And then we get to activate that Ash of War, which will give you the 100 extra holy damage. You're going to have 2 swords in your hand, and then you get that R2, which obviously has all of the attacks in a row, which does a lot of damage. By the way, I did want to mention the Sacred Scorpion Charm and also the Holy tier are only going to boost it by about 12 and 20 damage respectively because it's just 100 flat holy damage, so they're not really great for this build. Better off building the consecutive successive attack stuff, being able to get damage out of it that way. Overall, these are really fun. I hope I came up with a good build for this for you guys. It's something you can definitely build up on. They do a lot of damage. They're a lot of fun. If you're a fan of straight swords, these are definitely one of the better ones. And obviously with that unique moveset, lightweight, and obviously, again, being able to build up attacks very quickly gives you a lot of damage potential with this weapon. Also, if you're not subbed to this channel, definitely be sure to sub. There's going to be a ton more builds, ton more Elden Ring content. I can't wait for DLC. I'm so happy that it was finally announced. It's absolutely awesome that we're getting DLC. Sounds like, by the way, it's going to be big given the fact that they titled it Expansion. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to do builds, content up until then, throughout DLC. After. I've been enjoying Elden Ring like crazy. It's been a ton of fun doing all these builds. Once again, if you love overpowered PvE builds, be sure to check out all the awesome builds that are on my channel. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will catch you guys there.